This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
Hey everybody, this is Razib Khan with the Unsupervised Learning podcast, and I am here with Mr. Saylor, John Saylor. John, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a senior fellow and the director of higher ed at the Manhattan Institute. And before that, I worked at the National Association of Scholars for a long time. So I think a lot of people associate me with that, a great group. And, you know, I write a lot about higher education, pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, so actually, really quickly, just tell people what the National Association of Scholars is, because it sounds like a very generic, kind of like milquetoast group, but it's actually a kind of specific thing, right? So in terms of like what its role is.
Yeah, so the National Association of Scholars is, if a lot of people are probably familiar with Heterodox Academy. During the 2010s when wokeness started becoming concerning to people, they made this like membership organization to kind of push back. NAS is basically that, but founded in the 1980s instead. So it's a membership organization and a think tank that was really has a very interesting history with its original advisory board had like Jacques Barzoon and the philosopher Quine on it. It's just like this mix of people who are really concerned about that era's, they called it obviously like political correctness, the campus wars then. And so since then it's kind of just been this hub for people in academia to kind of organize and push back against things that are concerning regarding kind of the mission of higher ed. And it also has like a think tank function. And so that's where I got started. I basically got started writing about higher education as kind of on the think tank side of NAS, and I'm pretty much doing the same thing now at Manhattan Institute.
All right. So you're now at the Manhattan Institute, doing the good work with my friend Colin Wright and Charles F. Lehman, and actually I am I should get Rayhan on the podcast sometime. I've known Rayhan. I've known the president of the Manhattan Institute now for almost 20 years. So it's we're old men. But it's a great place. So there's been a lot for you to we know each other from the internet, as they say. There's been a lot for you to write about over the last decade, and I mean, compared to even the 90s or before, I don't know, about 2010, because the awakening happened, and academia has really been hit by it. That's why like Heterodox Academy was founded, which is another group. But there's various groups, and then there's whole websites that were started to basically cover like the craziness that's happening on campus, and like FIRE was originally Foundation for Individual Rights. And what was the E for again? Do you remember?
In education.
Education, yeah. Well, I mean, it was originally founded because of on-campus stuff, and so right now, as we're recording, there's kind of the Trump administration, spearheaded by their consigliere, Christopher Rufo. I had to say that because he's Italian, but they're targeting higher education. Harvard might get its federal funding blocked, and Trump is threatening its tax exempt status. We are in a literal, well, not literal, but we are in a cultural political war right now between higher education and the government, the Trump administration. And I knew this was coming. I think you knew this was coming. We have sources, we have contacts. Also, Christopher Rufo basically said it was coming. So I mean, like, if you're surprised, you are not like paying attention. He was saying that whether it was going to be DeSantis or Trump, because Rufo has been telegraphing this. I mean, not telegraphing. He's been writing this for a while now, that we need to go at higher education, not to tear it down. Some people some people just want to like just blow it up and rebuild. I think Christopher's his goal is to reappropriate and turn them to more mainstream conservative from his perspective ends, right? Because he's like, we got to have. I mean, I think Rufo. I've been to some talks like IRL in real life, and he's like, we need to have our kids go to Harvard. We need to have like conservatives going to Harvard, people that want to defend Western civilization, that sort of thing. We can't send them all to Hillsdale or wherever. That's not his attitude, or have them go to trade school. Okay,
Right.
that is also a strain now on the right where it's like, don't go to college, go to trade school, become a plumber. Which okay, anyway, so all of this is happening, and you're writing about the goings on in higher education, and recently I talked to Jacob Schell, who is an academic at Temple, about how academia can save itself based on the monoculture, the ideological diversity. I know you've gotten like, I've heard this from other people. I have friends in academia. You've gotten a lot of your stories from FOIA, Freedom of Information requests, like at public universities where emails are FOIAble, right? And sometimes they try to stall or make it really difficult. But you got like, tell me what you found in FOIA that might surprise people.
Yeah. And I think that like a lot of what I've reported on kind of like confirms the impression that people get about higher education. So when I first started reporting on higher ed, I remember one professor I talked to. This is, I was primarily just calling people up and doing interviews, and one professor I talked to was like, every day the university wakes up and breaks the law. Which I quote all the time. I think it struck me as just like a really funny way of saying it at the time. And I think was like, when you're trying to actually just do fact-based reporting, you can hear these things, but it's also like, well, okay, you're just telling me that. The what I've been able to kind of ascertain through FOIA requests, and really just trying to get as much of this behind the scenes documentation as I can has like absolutely confirmed that to me. Which I guess is not that surprising because again and again I talk to scholars and that's just common knowledge, and that plays into what you're talking about. So I think this is a good way to set the stage for talking about like the reaction that's happening right now, the kind of counter reaction against what higher education's become. But yeah, so I mean, just to give like some examples of what I've done with FOIA, a few years ago, I was just researching universities in Texas, and I found that like at Texas Tech, the biology department passed this resolution in 2020, and they said we're going to require diversity statements, and we're going to heavily weigh them for all faculty hires. And so they also said in the resolution that they would have like a separate presentation on their evaluation of these diversity statements, which was very nice for me because like a big question I had was we have these hypothetical arguments that are going on in by then you had people like Abigail Thompson and groups like FIRE writing about how diversity statements function as an ideological litmus test, and I wanted to see if like that's how it actually plays out in practice. Now I realize like, oh, there are these presentations that just lay out how different actual people have scored on their diversity statements. And so I FOIA'd them, and Texas has great public information laws. They got the records back to me really quickly, and what it said was pretty much a confirmation of the or like what I found was pretty much a confirmation of those arguments. One I think he was a virologist, was given like was penalized for not being able to describe the difference between equity and equality. Another one was another professor was penalized for microaggressions, and I think that what they did was they mistook a woman scholar. They thought that like a woman professor was a graduate student. Another one was given a low score base or like flagged for saying that they that like they treat all of their students equally, which is actually like a pretty much written rule in a lot of the evaluations of these things, that like you get a low score if you're gonna if you say pretty much like espouse race neutrality, colorblindness, things like that. If that's your approach to diversity, you're actually going to get a low score on this review. Another guy got a high score, or was rewarded for giving a land acknowledgement at the beginning of his job talk. So I mean, this kind of thing basically just confirmed, like, okay, a lot of the arguments are in favor of this kind of evaluation. I don't think they're necessarily good faith arguments, and we can get into that, because I think that, in large part, this tool is like functionally a way to discriminate on the basis of race without ever saying you're doing that. But what it kind of confirmed was that, like, this is a way to take the evaluation of virologists and microbiologists and cell biologists and infuse sort of whatever the trendy social justice concepts are into that evaluation, and like weigh it on a pretty heavy scale. This was the evaluation of diversity statements counted. I got the rubric, and it counted for about the same as like their teaching evaluation. So they weighed teaching and diversity, your commitment to diversity, about the same. That was just like one of the earlier documents that I acquired. It was at a time when this was like really a hot issue, in a kind of undecided issue in places like Texas. So it led to a lot of policy changes almost immediately. But what you found was, what I found is that, like, this method pretty much always turns up really ridiculous stuff, and stuff that can move the needle just by virtue of the fact that, like, behind the scenes, you get a lot of academics, or like what academics say will in a lot of cases just strike normal people as crazy. Or, I wouldn't say all academics. I would say when you're looking specifically for people who are kind of advocating for these social justice policies, if you look at what they're actually doing, if you can find sort of behind the scenes records where they're more frank about it, there's just a huge mismatch between what they are trying to push and what, like, a normal parent who wants to send their kids to university would think is appropriate.
Yeah, so let me just like some quick context here, I guess. You're talking about Texas Tech. A lot of people are not familiar with the geography of Texas. Texas Tech is in Lubbock. It's kind of in the panhandle up by Oklahoma. It's in the far northwest corner. Is West Texas. It's a city about like 250,000 people. It's not a huge city, but it's not a small town. On the other hand, it has a Republican mayor. And this is a city that on the presidential level has voted for Donald Trump. It's like a 60% Republican city. This is a Republican-leaning city. And so one of the things that I do want to point out to a lot of people out there is, Texas A&M had a similar problem with, frankly, just stupid administrators that were engaging in racism in terms of they're, not going to hire white males or whatever. They straight out said it. A&M is an ag school, in College Station. Again, College Station is not as conservative. It's by Houston. It's not as conservative as Lubbock, but it's on the, centrist conservative side, center right side, I would say. So, it's an ag school, engineering, agriculture. It's the school itself, it's not like UT, which is the flagship, university. And okay, you could kind of understand the ivory tower. These are, these academic institutions often, not always, but often, are embedded in extremely conservative areas in extremely conservative states. So what you're having happen here is ideological capture in enemy territory is the way I would describe it, which is, one of the things that I would tell academics is, do you understand what you're doing, what you're setting yourself up for? Because they are in such a bubble, on the Texas Tech campus, for example, they're in such a bubble in their department. They think they can get away with this. And that when someone shines the light on them, they're like, what? We're just doing our thing. Like, what's wrong? Well, I mean, this would be like funding, I don't know, this is like the Hoover Institution at Stanford, which is always quote unquote controversial, because it's conservative on Stanford's campus. But it's because, it's ideologically kind of out of step with the, center left, I would say, not like super left, Silicon Valley ethos, Well, I mean, these universities like Texas Tech, they don't know sometimes, or they're not like self-aware about like, what kind of community they're in. And then when this stuff comes out, people are like, "What the hell?" Right? I mean, basically. So
Yeah,
I want to
yeah.
put that out there.
It's interesting. Like I spend a decent amount of time looking at these universities that don't have like any pressure from constituencies that would really want to push back against social justice politics. So like you can look at like there's this diversity statement evaluation rubric at Emory University, where it basically takes like Ibram Kendi's language. It takes this language of anti-racism, and it's like that is basically the way in which they want departments to evaluate diversity statements. It's really, really blatant. At Berkeley, you obviously have these crazy initiatives where they've kind of spearheaded a lot of things where like 600 of 800 applicants get cut from a hiring initiative just on the basis of that sort of evaluation alone. But it's really not like I really have not seen a major distinction between some of these really protected schools and schools that are universities that are in red states. I mean, there are some red state universities that like do have that are pretty comparatively tame. But when you look at like Ohio State, for instance, so I reported this one story where a professor at Ohio State. I mean, first of all, Ohio State. They're in 2021, their president announced this hiring initiative where she said we're going to hire 150 professors through this program called Race, Inclusion, and Social Equity. And basically, she said like a certain number of those people are going to be people of color, which is really remarkable that at that point you could basically say that you're gonna implement some kind of racial quota as the university president and it not raise massive legal red flags right off the bat. But then the disciplinary focus of these hires had to be like race or equity or something related to social justice. And so you had hires in like the math department or jobs posted in the math department, biology department that were like biology and equity, like STEM equity. Or and then if you just went down the list, you realized that year, the year after, basically all of the jobs that were advertised in the College of Arts and Sciences, like a vast majority of them focused on the kind of these pretty politicized areas of specialization. Like I do acknowledge it's like absolutely possible for you to study these issues in a way that is not tendentious. Um, but you could tell just from the job advertisements that this was totally tendentious. And then I wrote about that. Somebody at Ohio State told me that, oh, it's even worse. Every job, every search committee at Ohio State has to fill out this elaborate, they call it diversity recruitment report, where you basically describe how you set up the search in order to increase diversity, how you evaluated candidates in such a way that you evaluated candidates' contributions to diversity. And every single department for like 3 years had to fill out this elaborate report, and it had to be approved by deans before a search committee could even go and hire or interview finalists. And so when I got those back, what it revealed was like, first of all, there were just like a lot of really hilarious, crazy evaluations. Like one candidate, they were in that box that asked like, how does this candidate contribute to diversity, equity, and inclusion? They started by saying this candidate is a first generation queer fat scholar of color. So they're basically giving somebody points for being overweight. And then a lot of them were just like, yeah, we are prioritizing race in this search. One job search, they literally were like, we are only inviting Black finalist candidates, and they made that very clear, and that got approval at Ohio State. This is not just like kind of a problem that only arises in institutions where the state where the institution is supported by is like on board with that agenda. It absolutely makes sense that there's a big rift between the university and the broader state, because Ohio State, this is JD Vance's state. um, uh, uh, it, in hindsight, it absolutely makes sense that what we have now is like a massive backlash.
Yeah, I mean, so I do wonder, like, the different conditions. So, I know the situation in STEM pretty well. There are people who are just like, I mean, okay, so how do I say this? I mean, you know, I guess like in math would be like the term is well ordered set. In terms of in terms of the publication record of some people versus others. Okay, sometimes it's a bubble. It's like, okay, like this person got the job because they're part of like this pedigree and all this stuff. Pedigree matters. But in some cases, I mean, a lot of cases, like a lot of the applicants, it's just like there's a huge gap. And there are cases where, usually they are underrepresented minorities, which for the non-Americans is usually Black or Latinx or Indigenous or something like that, and women. And there are cases I can I could name them. That's rude. I'm not going to do it. But everyone knows there are people in like fields like, well, I'm going to name the fields, computational biology or plant genetics, where they've been hired at a Research One university, of well, frankly, of a somewhat higher eminence than even Ohio State. I mean, the examples that I'm thinking of, where their publication record just does not warrant it at all, where it's not like, oh, maybe they're like half as productive. We're talking like 1% as productive as, I mean, and I'm not even joking, and then there are cases where, the converse case where I've had, friends who are extremely eminent, publishing Nature papers, while they were having a serious, while they were having serious like personal life issues going on, and then they were rejected they didn't even make it the final cut, because frankly, left wing faculty decided that they needed diversity and did not want a white male. These things happen. Everyone knows exactly what's happening. The interesting thing to me is I'm not in the humanities, so what is happening uh, at UC or University of Vermont? I'm thinking of like the maximal cases. Do you see what I'm saying? Because it's like even the people that I'm talking about with like poor publication records. Okay, well, I mean, they should maybe be at Cal State or so. I don't know, like something that's like, research two,
Right? Yeah.
the second broad category, whatever. They're not like they have a PhD, they got, they're just not great researchers or not very productive. But like I don't even know like what could be happening in say like ethnic studies at University of Vermont. Like what could that, you know what I'm saying? Like that is to me because the University of Vermont, I'm saying Vermont is a very liberal state, very white liberal state, probably pretty woke. There's gonna be no supervision. There's gonna be no check. Like when you're talking Texas Tech, it is a university that's geared towards science and technology in the reddest part of a red state, right? So there you're gonna have, you have some opportunities. You have some people who want to cooperate with you. But I mean, what's going on at University of Vermont in their like comp lit department? I don't know. I don't even know.
Yeah. It's interesting when I first started reporting on, especially campus diversity policies. What sort of surprised me is that the kind of worst cases of official policies, um, that required kind of intensive attention to diversity in all of these different ways, usually on search committees. Those policies tended to come out of STEM rather than out of the humanities. And I think the main reason for that is that there's a lot more resistance in STEM to getting on board with those initiatives in the first place. So like a lot of disciplines in the humanities, you just in the social sciences to some extent, you just have um eh, there is just already a baseline greater degree of ideological bias. That is something that a lot of scholars see as much more central to their basic work. So like it's conceivable, it's probably the case often that you have very progressive scientists who just want to like do their science and who also um, understandably don't see somebody's commitment to a particular like social cause as connected to how you should evaluate their their application to a job. And so what I've seen, I think there are two really obvious reasons that the sciences then have these a huge proliferation of these policies that you can kind of document and point to like early 2010s is where it really exploded. It's because of the NIH and the NSF, and in large part, not exclusively, but you have in about 2012, the NIH starts putting a lot more emphasis on diversity. And this is something that I think that policymakers who want to change things should pay attention to. Like those that stated priority shifted what universities were. It like pretty much immediately creates a shift in what universities want to do. Because of how important NIH funding is. The NSF did the same, or did something a little bit different. They just created these massive like bureaucracy development programs where they would give grants for basically administrators to go and create these projects whereby you end up with policies like every search committee has to have a diversity advocate on the search committee who is responsible for telling the dean whether the search committee can continue with its search or whether the slate of applicants is not diverse enough. These are policies that were created by the federal government. They're also created because they had to be created to some extent because this priority is just like not as inherent to the discipline in the sciences. So to your question, what's happening in the humanities? I would say like one interesting line of research I've been doing recently is on the Mellon Foundation, the Andrew Mellon Foundation, $8 billion endowed like old money foundation. Its primary mission since it got started, a big funding category that it's always pushed is the humanities. If you look at what it has funded recently, it's basically entirely humanities research that has an explicit activist bent. And so you get these hiring programs that give special favor to and actually use a lot of creative, cunning administrative techniques to advance scholars who really see their scholarly work as an extension of kind of like a political agenda. And so I've never looked extreme, especially closely at University of Vermont, but I know like in the UC system, there's this massive program. It's not exclusively in the humanities, but it's a set aside hiring program that basically converts postdoctoral fellows to tenure track professors without having to evaluate them through a normal tenure track faculty search. And it's funded by the Mellon Foundation. It's and if you look at the humanities scholars who are hired through that program, pretty much across the board, regardless of the discipline that they're in, if it's history or English or ethnic studies, they basically share the same the same disciplinary or methodological tenets. It is almost exclusively focused on race and identity. It heavily emphasizes these kind of obscure, almost mutated concepts. You have like if you just read their areas of specialization, I think a lot of people would be like, what's going on here? You have like a lot of people in queer of color critique. That's a very common one. You have a lot of people. You have a surprising number of people just doing like pornography studies, fat studies.
Wait. What? Okay. What is pornography? Wait, what?
Yeah.
Wait, do they just watch porn all the time? I mean, I'm trying to like get a sense of like what that could be. I'm sorry, I've never heard of this.
Right. Well, I can tell you it's not.
I thought I've heard a lot of things, but pornography studies. That's
Yeah. There are like 4 or 5 scholars who've been recruited through this program who say that one of their areas of specialization is porn studies, and it's like it's often about what they end up writing about is how like queer pornography subverts dominant narratives. Or I think there's a person who does both fat studies and porn studies, so it's like subverting narratives about fat people. It's funny to go back to like books from the early 90s and critiques of the academy from the early 90s, like tenured radicals. And and like the things that they were objecting to some extent, like it's there is a connection between the concerns from back then and the concerns that we have now. But at the same time, there really is just this weird, it's not just like activism, it's actually just really dumb scholarship. It's actually just like really low quality dumb scholarship that gets very little pushback because everyone in a given everyone who's surrounding these people pretty much is on board with at least the political agenda. And so, maybe these are not the most productive scholars in the world, and people would acknowledge that, but they still kind of get by. And I think that on one hand, it just means that like those people end up advising PhD students, and the PhD students write even stupider dissertations. And like there is one person I report who's a part of this program whose dissertation was titled "Ice on Fire," like the agency ICE. And she said that what she was doing was using a haunting methodology to examine the way that like detained immigrants in ICE detention like push back against their uh, 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 you know I don't even remember exactly what she was saying they do, but it was like the methodology. Her description of her methodology was a haunting methodology, like you know ghosts and spirits. I have no idea what that means. I think that like it's transparently dumb. But it also means that like we now are in a situation where like there are disciplines that are just packed with people who are either doing that kind of scholarship or who are at least like tacitly on board with that kind of scholarship being done. And so it makes sense that like a lot of humanities disciplines are just in a really, really bad place.
Well, as you might, you want me. I don't know if you specifically reported on this because it might not be your bailiwick, but Heather McDonald has talked about the number of majors in humanities has been declining. I mean, some of it is demand side, but some of it I think is also supply side. Insofar as like, why would you get? I mean, so Shakespeare or Tolstoy, or something, something like this, or whatever, like, if you wanna use a non-Western example, maybe, like, the Mahabharata or something, or, like, there's works of literature, works of art, of the humanities, that people have, like, agreed are great and, they're culturally significant and all these things, and then you're, like, getting into, like, queer porn studies, and, I mean, yeah, you can maybe get an academic tenured sinecure job for that, but, like, nobody's gonna consume this scholarship. Like, let's assume that the scholar is smart. It's like nobody cares, honestly. The second issue is that you just point to. A lot of these people are not smart. They're stupid. They're not intelligent people. You can tell. So for example, there are people. Look, I'm a right wing guy, but there are communists. There are communists and Marxists where it's like, okay, like you're obtuse. Like, how can you be a Marxist? But they're really smart, and you can tell they're really smart, and they know the literature. And when you argue with them, it's like you're sparring with someone that has some weapons to work with. You
Yeah.
know. Okay, so yeah, and like this is a cliche thing. Old school leftists are often pretty bright, actually. Again, I think they're obtuse and whatever. I don't agree with them ideologically, but they're smart. Some of these new school, like critical race type people, they're just not smart. They're dumb because they were not selected for their ideological rigor because they don't have rigor in them. They were selected for their identity, So they're like, So for example, a canonical example would be like an obese, queer black woman. Okay, I mean that's like you check so many boxes there. Like you could be semi-literate, and get a PhD and a job in some places. Honestly, I think so.
Yeah, yeah. So it's worth pointing out that like and I wrote about this recently in City Journal that like you're in an environment in higher ed right now where those people who check the right boxes and also are kind of involved with some sort of like social justice activism or social justice focused research, they pretty much have support and like a lot of institutional backing to pursue an academic career, like from the moment they get on campus, probably even before. So like there's there's this one professor at Ohio State, a transgender woman professor named Lavelle Ridley, whose self-described research agenda is to show like the liberatory power of Black transgender women, and to advance like an anti-capitalist prison abolitionist agenda. This is like the bio that this person like has given out for talks that they've gone and they've gone and made. So but if you look at I'll just say her CV, it starts with like undergrad. There was a Mellon funded diversity focused program, a fellowship program that gives students stipends and also mentorship to get like to have essentially like a writing sample for graduate school. So first she was in that program, and then in graduate school she was a part of the University of Michigan's Rackham Merit Fellowship, which is ironically not about merit but about DEI. Then after that, she did a postdoc, that postdoc that I was talking about at UC Berkeley, at UC Berkeley, but through the UC system, which is also funded by the Mellon Foundation. Then after that, went to Ohio State, where she's a professor. Like through that cluster hiring program that I talked about earlier, where she's a professor of queer and trans studies. Her department got a grant from the Mellon Foundation the year that she went there. I'm almost there. There are good reasons to think that grant was a grant for her professorship specifically, although I don't know that for sure. Then afterwards, like the Mellon Foundation has these set aside like programs that they've built through other universities that give out special like fellowships for early scholars to do more research. So she got one of those fellowships from the University of Kansas, and now she's on the steering committee for a program that gives out fellowships, a different program that also gives out fellowships for this kind of activist research, and that like that's the emphasis of the program. So the whole career path of this person who says my research is about advancing an anti-capitalist prison abolitionist agenda from from undergrad all the way up to this more advanced faculty position now has been deeply padded and furnished by these incentive programs. And I think like what I try to emphasize is it's not just that we have a situation where like a lot of faculty members are progressive, and so over time they've hired more progressive people because they like people who agree with them. Rather, you have a lot of programs that are specifically making that a priority. They're specifically making kind of this the thing that will get you a faculty job, and implicitly to the exclusion of other disciplinary emphases. And that even makes me sometimes think, like, people like to point out that all of the, there's a huge skew, a huge like leftward skew amongst undergraduates who are entering elite institutions. There's probably the case just about everywhere. Like if you're an undergrad going to Harvard, you're probably going to be progressive. But I've always thought like, okay, these are students who have spent their whole life trying to get into Harvard and saying the right things in order to get this like high status achievement. Why, maybe they're all just progressive because they're progressive, but if they're obsessed with getting into a high, like basically the highest status accomplishment a young person can make, really, like what would encourage them to do that? Well, maybe because like all of these institutions are saying that that a clear way to advance in our field or to win these awards is by embracing kind of like an activist agenda. I think that that's a much bigger feature of kind of like the talent pipeline problem, both in academia and actually outside academia, than a lot of people realize.
Yeah. Okay. So you mentioned the Mellon Foundation. What weren't the Mellons? Like, isn't that a conservative family? Like, I'm kind of confused.
Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
happened there?
they, obviously Andrew Mellon himself was like a, treasury secretary, like a conservative treasury secretary under three presidents, but most prominently Calvin Coolidge, obviously a very conservative guy. The foundation itself was started by his son, but his son, I, I I don't think he had like an especially political reputation, but certainly was not known for pushing this kind of stuff. And then, at least one of his grandchildren is currently like a major Trump donor. I mean, the big issue is just that like the family lost control of the foundation. The family, I think I don't know the entire story there, but like you get you add board members to your foundation that also have a say in the focus of the foundation. Maybe you're a family member involved in this legacy giving institution and you don't want to do it anymore. You hand it off to someone else, and like over time, it just kind of goes in that direction. And I think it's also just like incredibly it it's obviously been a big win for um uh, people who want to push a certain kind of like social justice agenda to have not just the Mellon foundations, but a lot of foundations on their side. So it's long been a very effective target for kind of activism. And I think that I don't think that there's like commensurate activism coming from the other side. I don't think that there's like necessarily much pushback when you have these battles within foundation boards.
Yeah, I mean, what is the like, so you've been like pretty deep, and like, I want to pivot to the Harvard thing for a little while because it's in the news while we're recording. But what is the end game of hiring all these frankly just whack people that look? Nobody really cares. Okay, no one really cares about fat pornography or whatever fat queer pornography. Like I'm just but yeah, there's some fetishists who care. I mean, just honestly, but like scholarly wise, no one really cares about this stuff, right? I mean, like, it's like humanities are famously like barely cited. They don't really cite each other and all this stuff. It's just like it's all like I'm gonna use the word circle jerk. I just think it's appropriate if you're talking about like pornography studies, but nobody really cares. So what is the end stage? Like, these people are going to be in the universities. Like, what is going to happen? I mean, at some point they're going to be like there for 30 or 40 years. Like these are the first. The last decade has been the first crop of this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I think that what's interesting is that in a lot of the there's something really interesting to observe in what kind of higher ed leaders are doing as they push back against this. I mean, first of all, before the most recent move, I mean, most recently, the Trump administration sent an updated letter to Harvard, where they sent an original letter that laid out some ways that they wanted Harvard to reform and kind of their conditions for reform. And Harvard's president said, basically sent out this letter saying the title was "Our Resolve," which I kind of thought was going to be like our resolve to fight this. Instead, it was our resolve to work on this problem of anti-Semitism and to work on, to like work with essentially the Trump administration. They were ready to do it. And then the Trump administration followed up with a more detailed letter with all of these demands. And some of those demands are functionally impossible for an institution to actually comply with, and which is really interesting. It's interesting to speculate about what the Trump administration is actually trying to do. There's a lot we could get into there if you want. And then Harvard's president obviously like said or very quickly said, we can't do this. We're gonna fight back. So two things that these leaders have been doing while now increasingly pushing back against the Trump administration. One is they've been talking about this compact between universities and higher education that has existed since like the mid-century, where universities provide this essential function for our kind of society. They mostly, because this is mostly scientific research, they mostly talk about like the benefits that science has given us over the last 80 years, but also implicitly and sometimes explicitly, like universities provide kind of this institution where you can pursue the truth. There's sort of like a democratic function to universities, and implicit in this talk that there's like a compact between the federal government and like the nation and universities, where the nation provides this funding and universities provide something back that's vital for the nation. That's like that's kind of the tack they've been taking. And at the same time, like when the New York Times has published like 4 different opinion pieces denouncing what Trump has done, denouncing the Trump administration for its overreach, referring to this as like, what Orban or Modi would do. Like, this is just an attack on the universities. This is something that the universities should fight. Now Harvard is on the fight. But it's interesting because they all do that, but then virtually every one of them is like, but there are huge problems with higher education. Like there are, a lot of them will basically turn around and say universities have not lived up to their mission. Which, if you think about it, it's like, okay, you're saying that pushing back against the universities in a really, really aggressive way is absolutely wrong. But you're also saying that universities are basically not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're like, implicitly, they're saying they're not living up to their covenant, to that compact that was made between the nation and the university. And it's funny, even Larry Summers, he wrote this op-ed that was, he's former president of Harvard, and he wrote this op-ed saying like Harvard should fight back using any legal means it can. And he also turned around and said, but Harvard should also reform itself, and it should reform itself aggressively through. He basically said that they should ignore the norms of faculty governance in order to make reforms, so that like politicized professors don't get in the way of these like really essential reforms. I think one thing that's happened is that the Trump administration has kind of opened up space for university leaders who actually do want like big changes to happen, to say, we're not this bad other group from the outside that's coming in and like trying to destroy us, but we are going to take, we are going to reform these things that they might not have had the leverage to reform in the past, which I think, maybe that's a part of the end game coming like from the Trump administration right now. Yeah. So, but like, if you think about it in terms of that compact, then like what we have right now is a lot of Americans who think that like essentially the compact's been broken. Yeah, 10 years ago, only in surveys, only about 10% of people said that they had little or no trust in universities. Now that's up to like 32%, and only like a third of Americans say they're very trustful of universities. The people who are distrustful, they say that primarily like a perceived political agenda is the reason for that distrust. And as long as that's the case, I mean, one, it's just unsustainable. Whether in principle you think the universities are totally in the right, it's unsustainable to have a situation where a lot of the country that's funding you to the tune of billions of dollars thinks that what you're doing is like not worthy of any trust at all. But two, I think that like hopefully actually a lot of people have gotten the point that actually this stuff is what universities have done has actually broken the compact in a serious way. And so if you're going to cite this implicit agreement between the nation and universities to say like, yeah, this is why we have this lavish funding, this really sweet arrangement, then I think I think more and more people are maybe behind the scenes acknowledging that like, yeah, big things have to change in order for us to hold up our side of the compact.
Yeah, I mean, the weird thing is that, some of this research has shown that even liberals trust universities less, because when you're seen as ideological, even if it's on, quote, your side, they don't see you as okay. Like, I mean, your prestige, your status goes down. You know, so you don't even do what you're, you know. I don't know. It's like you're not even like supporting the side you think you're on, because part of your value is as a somewhat neutral, at least arbiter. What I like to say is, academics before the awakening period, they were always liberal, but they make an effort to kind of be objective, or try to, like, be a scholar. And there was bias, whatever. There was a slant. There's always going to be a slant. But what happened, like especially after Trump was elected in 2016, is like moral clarity kicked in, and they just decided, hey, we're on one side, and then but if you're just always going to be on one side, then like there's really no point in you saying anything because you're not adding any information or value.
Yeah.
We already know what side you're going to be on. We know what you're going to say.
And I think, it's interesting because it's also the case that, um, you know, uh, it varies from campus to campus and different, you probably know different people who will describe the proportions differently. But what you usually have is not just like this majority of people who now think that, or who are now cool with politicizing their discipline, or who are really um, interested in integrating social justice activism into what they're doing, regardless of whether that's a science or humanities discipline. What you have is a lot, some proportion of like social justice activists, if just to give them a name, and that's probably not even the majority in most institutions. Then you have maybe a very small minority of people who are like, hardliner, either conservative or like staunch academic freedom people. And then you have this big group in the middle that like, they just want to do their science, or they just, they're kind of persuadable. And if a social justice activist is really pushing them to do something, they're not going to be in a place where they want to push back. I'd say like for the one big feature that I think has meant universities have tilted so much in the direction of the social justice activists, and it's allowed them to kind of hire on the basis of their priorities and kind of increase their numbers over time, is that like the federal policy and the general policy landscape has given them a lot of tools to push their particular side. And so I talked about like NSF giving out these grants that say you have to have a diversity advocate on your search committee, or you have to have a university dean that creates these policies where like the university dean looks at the finalist list to make sure it's sufficiently diverse. And that in a search committee, that means that like you can have like that spread of, okay, there are a few activists, there are a few academic freedom people, there are a few people in the middle, but the activists kind of have the tool to hammer out like, okay, we have to be more attentive to this and this priority because the policy is there. Or, in kind of a different context, we have to be attentive to this priority because our training grant, our NIH training grant, which is like $20 million, and funds all our postdocs, or graduate students, is it has to have a stellar diversity recruitment plan, or it's not going to be considered. So we have like, these are all tools that have been at the disposal of that group for a long time, and has like kind of expanded their influence and also their numbers. And now what's happening is like in really kind of rapid in a really rapid twist, and it'll be interesting to see where the chips fall and what happens when the dust settles. It seems like the federal landscape is sort of turning in such a way that could give those tools to the other group. We'll see if that actually happens, but I think that's kind of the trend that I'm noticing, especially when you have these people denouncing the Trump administration really vociferously, but also turning around and saying like, yeah, but we really have to take care of this, and this problem.
Yeah, I mean, this was always my argument during the period of politicization, where, you know, um, you're trying to use the master's tools to tear down the master's house. The master's going to grab the tools and turn it right against you,
Right? Yeah.
and like come at you because if you're a I remember years ago, this was like almost a decade ago, I think it might have been a decade ago. You know, what is it? Alice Dreger, who wrote a really great book. I mean, she's kind of gone silent. I don't know what her issue is, but whatever. But kind of like anti-woke or whatever. I don't know. She wasn't even anti-woke, but Alex Dreger is Alex Dreger. Those of you who know who I'm talking about know, and otherwise just Google it. Look it up on Wikipedia. And so she was saying something about scholarship, and some woman responded, how do we make it political? I want all of my scholarship to be political. And Alice was like, no, that's not the point at all. Though that's bad. Once you make it political, it's not really scholarship. And I mean, that's kind of has happened. It's not really scholarship. And so, the Trump administration, I mean, they're coming hard. I mean, I don't think everything that they're saying is actually fair, and everything that they're doing is fair. But so for example, just the anti-Semitism stuff. I think they're going on overkill. But the problem is the universities have already established that they're political spaces, and that they want to privilege certain political viewpoints. Well, if you've already established that you can privilege certain political viewpoints, then you're going to use the same sort of logic in whatever way you want to use it. So so for example, this idea that Jewish students don't feel safe on campus, yeah, that's probably true. I mean, some of these like Jewish girls that are like crying at some of these pro-Palestinian, I mean, like, I get why they're crying. I mean, no offense, like, women are a little bit more emotional, and they're saying mean stuff about Zionists, quote unquote. We know what they're really talking about. Okay, so like, it's literally true. Now, I think that they should just suck it up and deal with it. But when the shoe was on the other foot, we know how it worked, right? And so they're just asking for the same consideration that left wing activists got, and so they don't really have a ground to stand on because they have no credibility. The academia has no credibility. When the presidents of these Ivy League schools were saying, like, we believe in free speech, everyone laughed because we know they don't believe in free speech. We know that they don't believe in
Yeah,
any of that stuff. They'll just do whatever
yeah.
what they need to do.
And they're making one of the more egregious kind of examples of hypocrisy right now is at first Chris Eisgruber, Princeton's president, came out and said he's come out and kind of positioned himself as one of the chief spokesmen opposed to working with the Trump administration at all. They're going to lose a lot of funding as a result of that. I don't think they're even going to try to pursue necessarily legal action to get the funding back. We'll see. But he has said multiple times look at what they're trying to do. They're trying to influence our admissions decisions because that was a part of the Trump administration. That's been a part of the Trump administration's demands. And he has said something like, I don't think the federal government should use its funding prowess to influence the way universities admit students, which is on its face kind of laughable to anyone who's paid attention to what the federal government has done with admissions for the last however many decades. I mean, first of all, the Civil Rights Act just means that universities are beholden to the federal government in serious ways. And now universities are learning that can cut both ways. And I think that one of the reasons that beyond there being a constituency with a big constituency within the Trump administration that really wants to address the anti-Semitism issue, and the using the issue of anti-Semitism means that the Trump administration has legal grounds to go after universities because this is a violation of civil rights law. Creating a hostile environment is a violation of civil rights law, and that means that the Trump administration can do exactly what earlier administrations pushing in the opposite direction have done. And that civil rights law is not even the only way that that the federal government has used its funding prowess to push this kind of to make universities effectively change their admissions policies. That's just one example, but I think that it's interesting that now Alan Graber, the president of Harvard, now that he has put his foot down and said, I'm not going to work with the Trump administration because of this new list of demands, he's basically said this, the same thing. We can't, the federal government can't have a say in these kinds of things like admissions, which is just where were you when the NIH started requiring these recruitment plans? Where were you when the Obama administration started using Title IX to threaten, even some universities that weren't receiving federal funding, and say that you have to address claims about sexual assault in a particular way, or you'll lose your federal funding. It's sort of like these tools were already there for the Trump administration to use, and the administration is using them in an extremely aggressive way. But the stage was set by the other side.
Yeah, exactly. I remember when, I think it was like 2018. It was before 2020. Berkeley, they were making, they had exposed their hiring criteria in the biology department, and Jerry Coyne at University of Chicago was basically like, this is clearly, like, I don't know if he said racist, but it was basically designed to get underrepresented minority faculty by just weeding out everybody else. And at the time, a lot of professors at Berkeley were like, well, I mean, who can be against diversity? Like, what is your problem? Like, this is obviously neutral. I remember Mike Eisen would say that. I don't know if Eisen would. I mean, he seems to be a little more skeptical of some of this stuff than he was before. They're like, how can you oppose diversity and all this stuff? And the thing is like this is like I always explain like this is like if you were in the 1990s or like through the Bush, the George W. Bush administration, if someone says family values, and like, well, how can you oppose family values? We know what family values means.
Right.
It doesn't. It's not that the plain language is not what you need to understand. It's like the context of what it means. It's what as the competent people would say. It's a signifier. You know, family values, diversity. These are signifiers of much more complex things underneath them. And just like playing these language games is a bit tiresome, especially with academics who are extremely verbally adept. They're like, how could you oppose diversity? It's not ideological at all. Like, come on, like, exactly what you're doing, and we know what you're doing, and we know, and are we gonna play this game?
Yeah, and I mean, some of that is because it's funny how civil rights law has worked, where on one hand, it has functionally encouraged in universities and all sorts of other kinds of institutions to be hyper attentive to demographics, because if they aren't, they could have you know hostile environment lawsuits and investigations, or investigate lawsuits and investigations based on disparate impact, or if they aren't sufficiently attentive to the kind of like the basic diversity of their pool, they could be accused of like not taking the right steps to make sure it's an inclusive search in the first place. So there are all of these pressures that I think played a big part in creating this emphasis on diversity. But at the same time, it's illegal to just hire on the basis of race. It's illegal to do all sorts of things on the basis of race. And so actually, like, the equivocation is sort of baked into the legal requirements. Like, you can't come out and say we are going to hire on the basis of race. Every now and then a university will do that, and just like somebody will be too clueless of what the law actually is, and they'll say this postdoc is just for like Black, Latinx, and Pacific Islander scholars. And if you write an article about, if you find that and write an article about that, the university will quit. They'll change the requirement as soon as you make a request for comment. That kind of thing everybody knows is illegal. But a lot of the what's happened is essentially they've wanted to push that priority, and so they use this sort of obfuscating language, and that's the whole reason that that's the stated reason that diversity statements exist. That's often the reason that these that's often a stated reason that these like ideologically distorted cluster hires happen. It's on one hand, like, I think the people running like equity focused hires are on board with that political agenda, but it's also the political agenda is kind of a proxy for hiring on the basis of race. Like, there was one program that I looked into. Is this big like $250 million program funded by the NIH where they gave grants to universities for hiring, and they said that you have to hire people who contribute to inclusive excellence. You have to heavily weigh their statements on inclusive excellence. And the NIH actually repeatedly said, like, you cannot hire on the basis of race. That's illegal. You can't, they were covering for their legal liability really well. But the documents I got, I got emails like that were sent by University of New Mexico, like the University of New Mexico PIs, where like they eliminated one candidate because he was South Asian, and so he didn't count as a URM. They just like he was on the finalist list. They cut him out. They said the math department's really low on women, so we have 2 women, and this guy, we're going to cut this guy out because he doesn't check the box. And then later on in the email thread, they're like, I for sure don't want to hire white men. So even in this program where it's like the funding structure says you're not allowed to hire on the basis of race, you have to hire on the basis of this like buzzword, inclusive excellence. There's kind of like a twofold equivocation. On one side, people will say like, oh yeah, inclusive excellence, like you have to be like a sociopath to not be in favor of inclusive excellence. Like, yeah, and I think that like that's one reason why it's been hard. It was hard in the past for people to object to these policies because on its face, diversity, equity, and inclusion sounds like a great thing. Like it's hard for people to wrap their minds around that and potentially being like a sort of stand-in for a political a more robust political agenda. But on the other side, it's also an equivocation because it like in some ways it's sort of an empty term that just allows people behind the scenes to say like, okay, we're gonna make sure we hire the right people. We're gonna make sure we hire people on the basis of race.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mask falling off. Everyone knows what they're doing, and everyone has to play the game. And sometimes it's just like, oh, come on, like let's just like say what we're gonna do, and then they forget that this is a university email that's foiable. Because a lot of what I think people do is they'll talk amongst themselves, or that's not recorded. You don't know what they really say. It's just they can do whatever they want
Yeah.
as long as it's just a verbal communication and not too many people know. They'll coordinate that way. Yeah. So, and just so the non-Americans know, quotas are technically illegal in the United States. Like you can't just, they tried to do quotas in the 1970s. The Supreme Court struck them down. So you have to have a reason like diversity, and so they use this diversity metric. But they obviously do have certain goals. There are departments. So one of the things that I mentioned this, and I'll mention this again. Like there are departments I know where they did not hire white males. They kept rejecting white male applicants for years, and Asian males too. That's the same to them. But anyway, I think the Justice Department at some point will have to look at this. Because there's
Yeah.
a systemic. I mean, come on. I mean, you didn't hire a white male for 3 years. What's going on here?
There's been some like confusion about the situation at Harvard because and what you just said might actually help explain it. You have to wonder. So the Trump administration gave Harvard a list of demands, and a few weeks, like 2 weeks ago, and Harvard basically said, "Okay, we will work with you," which you would think is kind of a win. Then the Trump administration comes back with a much more robust list of demands, and like in some ways, reading through the letter, I was actually happy that they emphasized certain things that I've been really pushing. Like they basically said, like, your leadership decisions should be focused on empowering professors who are focused on the basic mission of the university and not focused on activism. The problem with anti-Semitism on campus, like that points to a deeper problem, this like ideological capture. But after a while, you start reading through this letter, and it's like, okay, the administration is demanding that the universities do like an assessment of every department's ideological diversity, and if it is not sufficiently diverse, ideologically diverse, they have to hire a critical mass of professors or admit a critical mass of students to ensure that they are diverse. And later on, they say, but also the university should do away with all ideological litmus tests. And so, that's, I mean, like if you say you have to hire professors until your departments are ideologically diverse, that actually means that like you probably just have to do away with certain departments, because there are some disciplines where there's like nobody going into the discipline is a self-declared conservative. Like if you look at if you take political affiliation as a proxy, there are some disciplines like anthropology where like surveys have found 0 professors in the field that are Republicans. So I think like that's a big problem, but this letter was, I think, just designed to get Harvard not to do it, not to go along. And I think what they actually want to do is they want to have a legal challenge, and they want to base their legal challenge on essentially violations of civil rights law. And this solves a problem that I've been aware of for a long time, which is that there's all of this illegal hiring going on in academia, but it's very hard to find a plaintiff. And I think the Trump administration might be setting itself up to be a plaintiff against Harvard and basically say, like, yes, we have legal basis to deny you funds because you're violating civil rights law. And so, in some ways, they want to go Harvard into not complying so that they can say, okay, we're going to take away $2 billion worth of your funding, which is what they immediately did afterwards. And if Harvard sues them, then they get into a fight over the legal basis of the legal basis and of removing those funds, which would be rooted in kind of these claims that like you can't hire on the basis of race and you can't violate Title
Yeah.
VI.
Yeah, I mean, what Inez Stepman, my friend Inez Stepman, who's been on this podcast before, what she's saying is, the civil rights law cuts both ways. You cannot not hire white and Asian people on the basis of race, and the issue here is, I think it would be like, like literacy tests in the South. Like, what were they? Literacy tests along with the grandfather clauses and exemptions. Like, the whole system was not explicitly racist, but it was clearly designed to exclude black Americans from the black citizens from the voting rolls. Okay, so the courts understand that all of these ideological tests, applied in certain ways. What was their intent? Their intent was clearly to filter out,
Yeah.
white males or Asian, whatever. I mean,
There's stated intent often.
Yeah.
Often
Yeah.
people adopt these policies saying that it's going to like increase
yeah.
the representation of certain groups, and the excluded groups are then, implicitly that is decreasing the representation of the groups.
And I will say one thing that people have noted, that's really, I don't know, it's funny, it's sad. The white males in academia that get jobs or that are on the job market, like, it's obviously hard for them. So one thing that they have to do is they have to be really, really into diversity.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, like, this is not going to happen. Like, no one would be like this, like, weird about it, but it would be like, I'm a white male, but I'm only going to hire black women for my lab, or so they'll say. Like, that's a caricature, but it's the kind of thing that you see white males in particular doing. Because some of the like underrepresented minority women, like, some of them are actually the least woke because they don't need to be woke.
Right.
Like, they're gonna get hired, and they know it. Actually, like, I know a case where she's a non-woke. I mean, people will be able to identify her if you care that much, but a non-woke biology professor who's a black woman, and she got hired out like a year. She took a postdoc, but she was already offered the job. Okay, I think it's at Cornell. That's because she was a black woman. They really wanted a black woman, right? But she's not woke. And what she told a friend of mine was like, well, if I don't take the job, some other woke person will take the job. So I'm going to take the job, even though I know that I shouldn't get this job, right? So the weird issue is, like, sometimes some of the most, I'm going to say the word fair-minded, but most like least ideological people I've actually met are people that are actually underrepresented minorities in academia, because there was no ideological litmus test for them. They were just hired on their identity.
It creates all sorts of weird job market effects. Some people have to be hyper attentive to their contribution, their intellectual contributions, their positions on these issues, where some people don't. It's also worth thinking about how, like, okay, there's a selection effect where, like, a lot of people, if you're conservative right now, I think if you talk to most young conservatives who have considered going into academia, if they've seriously considered it, they've probably been told by certain people, like, don't do it. And if they're not from a minority group that's going to be favored, all the more, like, they're going to be told, well, okay, things are going to be stacked against you. There's just like an overwhelming consensus that this is the case. This happens. Like, maybe you can make it through, but it's going to be a hard slog. And some people look at that and say, like, well, I could go into academia, but I could also just, like, go into a normal job and my life would be a lot better. And maybe I could do these things on the side. And that even creates, like, these downstream effects that I think it like distorts the discourse on both sides of the political spectrum, because in academia, what you have is, like, not only like explicit screening out, like, people are explicitly screened out, but people also self-select out. And so you have an academia where, like, where are the conservatives? They're not here. And a big response that you get often when you even bring up that there aren't conservatives in academia is now that, like, well, there just aren't any smart conservatives. Like, why would they not be in academia? Just, like, they're all stupid and we shouldn't allow them in the first place. And that's like a really bad situation to have in our, like, primary sense making institutions, and it creates this sort of, like, incestuous intellectual environment where some people aren't challenged. Like, I think the reason that there are these professors out there who are feel emboldened to say, like, oh, I felt so liberated when I saw the October 7th attacks, is, like, there's no one around them. There's no one in their field who would ever push back against that kind of thing. But there's actually, like, a mirrored, I'm curious if you think this is the case. You would probably know even better than me, but there's almost like a mirror image of that in the kind of, like, online right-wing intellectual world, where there are a lot of people who are super smart. They've gone through the academic kind of like they could have gone into academia and probably should have, but because either because they were discriminated against, or because they like perceived that would happen, they went somewhere else. And then because they're smart, they want to think about these things and create an intellectual community. And so what they do is they have their own like counter bubble on the internet in kind of the right wing, the intellectual spaces. And sometimes you get a situation where like these people aren't really challenged on things that they should be challenged
Oh,
on
that's fair.
either,
No,
because because
fair.
they're in this same situation where like all the people they're talking to are in this kind of like counter intellectual world and really they should just be in academia. They should just be in like an anthropology department or a history department, but they're not, and so they're not having these conversations with people on the other side of the political spectrum as much.
Yeah, as much. I mean, yeah, there is some of that. There is some of that. I don't think it's as extreme, partly just because it's not as institutionalized as a
Yeah,
structure, and so it's
yeah,
easier
yeah.
for people to, the whole peer review process and all these things. It does impose a certain type of conformity. And it's not like some of this stuff is not even like ideological. It's just like, oh well, you got to study this topic. Like for example, as you might know, there was a period recently where it's like all these historians, these white historians, were studying African American history
Yeah,
because they figured like this is their only way that they could ever get a decent academic job because they're white, you know.
yeah,
They
yeah.
still mostly won't get jobs. But like there was a situation where like people were like, this is a little weird that like most of these applicants are white that are studying Black American history, but they basically figured that's their only option to get an academic job. There's this guy at Yale, I forget his name. But he didn't get a job and he like admitted that it was because he was a white male and he's probably not gonna ever get a job. And then he had to like apologize and stuff like that because he's a liberal. But I mean, everyone knows he's exactly right. He like slipped up and told the
Right.
truth, and you're not supposed to tell the truth that as a white male you're discriminated against, which you are. Like in academic history, of course you're discriminated against. I mean, what kind of fool are you? Everyone knows. So he just admitted it, and he just because he felt bad because he's like, I've devoted my life to this, and I'm never, like I'll be lucky to teach at a community college and have a PhD from Yale. But that's the world you created by just like going along with things. It's kind of like a frog that's getting like warmer and warmer, and it just never ends up jumping out of the pot. I'm
Yeah.
sure like people are like, oh well, we can have a little bit of like diversity here, like put a little thumb on the scale a little bit, and the next thing you know, like there's just a whole groups of people that are not allowed to get jobs.
Right. And so like I think that there are actually like a lot of there's a lot of like kind of low hanging fruit ways to create a little bit more intellectual diversity that actually doesn't fall into the category of just like affirmative action for conservatives. Like
Yeah,
basically one reason that the job market, like the job market signal for people focused on like identity based history, those signals are pretty like loud and clear. It's usually just that universities, you look at the areas of specialization. I talked to a guy in German studies last year, and he told me, okay, there are like 8 jobs on the market, and 5 of them are like focused on social justice or identity. And so like he was basically like, I'm just not going to get a job. But a lot of these people are, a lot of graduate students look at that and say, okay, well, I better focus on these disciplines, and then they end up getting advised by people in those disciplines who maybe have like this a bit more of a tendentious approach. And so even people who are doing it in good faith will end up kind of getting drawn into the bubble. Like universities could stop this by just like, or could push back, take one simple step by just like saying, we're not going to hire in that field for a while. We have plenty of people. The discipline has plenty of people in that field. We're going to hire in like military history, which
yeah.
which very like there is no.
Uncool,
Yeah.
uncool, but yeah. Well, it sounds like we've been talking for a while, so like just as we close out, I want to say like sounds like you'll have a story to cover for a while longer. It's not we got the battle royale of the Trump administration against academia. I think that's going to be a big storyline for the next year or so, right?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how long it lasts. Maybe the next 4 years. One funny thing about what I'm doing now is I have to predict predict the unpredictable, predict what Donald Trump and his people are going to do. But at the very least, it gives me the opportunity to kind of talk about these underlying issues, which, I can't necessarily say what these negotiation tactics are aimed at, but at the very least, I can look at these letters and say, like, yeah, if you're talking about ideological capture, I can provide some insight there. That's absolutely what's going on.
Cool, cool. Well, it was nice, catching up with you, John. Obviously we follow each other on Twitter. We correspond, so I think I can like divulge that to the listener. And I think this has been normally I don't reference other podcasts that I recorded, but just to break the fourth wall a little bit, you contacted me right after I decided that I was going to post my podcast with Jacob Shell, which I actually recorded, I don't know, like a month and a half ago, a while ago. And this is an excellent compliment to that podcast, which as of the posting of this, will have been last week, and there's a lot of topics that I think we followed up on. I could probably, this is one of those issues where it's like I could do a podcast every week. I don't want to bore people with the same issues over and over again, but there's a lot going on here. Academia, the institution, and the money that's flowing into it, and the students whose lives are being changed. It's like a big story. It's a big domain. So, we do need to touch on it every now and then, and I hope the listeners appreciate it. Some of the older boomers here, like, things have changed since you were in college, or since you sent your kids to college. And you got to keep an eye on it. To some extent, like the story of this is that places like Texas Tech is inattention of more moderate and conservative voices, figures, politicos, and what this is kind of an unwinding of ideological capture is part of the story here, I think.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Well,
I yeah.
talk to you. I think this is the first time we've actually spoken, even though we've been
Yeah.
in touch for a couple of years.
Yeah, we've been corresponding, but did old school, and also like I don't post the videos of these podcasts, but I do see John's face, so we can have like this dynamic, responsive, humane conversation. But okay, I'll see you online, John.
All right, thanks.
This podcast for kids